Hello, I'm Thomas Chu. I'm the director of the Academic Success Center here at the College of Brockport, and I'm very pleased to welcome and introduce Francisco Cantu, who is our author of, we brought his memoir, Line Becomes a River, and thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, my biggest question of all of this whole journey of when you were living this life, because it is a memoir, and you were Border Patrol agent, you made this decision that your family didn't necessarily understand or agree, and you're doing this thing. Did you ever see yourself X many years later sitting here with me at Brockport talking about your book?
No, definitely not. I think I definitely didn't join the Border Patrol to be like a career Border Patrol agent. I joined out of college, with the idea that it would, help me understand what was actually going on in the border. Because I had spent, 4 years in my undergrad kind of focusing on the U.S.-Mexico border. I went to school in D.C., and so it felt very separated from what the actual reality that I knew from growing up in Arizona must be. And, I was going to school kind of at a similar time in as far as like the immigration debate. This was like 2005. There was a build the wall fight that was happening. There was a immigration reform push under George W. Bush. And so, the idea was that this was a way to have proximity to the issue and better understand it. And then I imagined I could go on to become an immigration lawyer or, a policymaker. I very naively had the idea that, I'd go do this for a couple years and then I'd have all the answers. I would see, what all these people hadn't seen, and then I would, I have all these ideas about how to
just like any 22-year-old.
Yeah,
does. Yeah.
I was
figure it out.
I was 22, and the idea, the very naive idea, also that I could be sort of like a force for good within this institution, and I think an institution that I understood was a violent one, and I think that as young people, especially, we often really underestimate the power of these institutions and these structures of oppression that have been functioning quite well in our in our society for decades, if not hundreds of years. And so I think that's kind of the cautionary tale. There is I think we do need people to to work to change things from within, but I think it's also really important not to underestimate the power of the institution to make us complicit in the violence of the state of the institution.
Well, now on the other side of that, doing traveling the country through your writing, through your speaking, and the ways that you advocate for just basically telling your story is a form of advocacy. You're letting people know. Do you think? I get the impression that that's a really powerful thing as well. That people talking about it to get the message out there that change is needed and it isn't as easy as maybe we want it to be. How have you felt since you published, and I know you've done a couple of these college visits and things like that. Do you feel like a change agent through that?
It's an interesting time right now because I think more people are paying attention to what's happening at the border than any other time in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And so on one hand, I think people are starting to ask the right questions, and people have the requisite amount of outrage about what's happening at the border right now. But I also think that I live in Tucson, Arizona. I live 45 minutes from the border. It's a very involved community. There's a lot of advocacy groups working on this issue. But we're here in Rochester. I have no idea what the engagement around border issues and border enforcement and immigration issues is like here. And so, to answer your question, if I'm at all of these places, university campuses far from the border, and I have the honor of having students read this book and be thinking about the border when they might not and be thinking deeply and thinking
beyond the snapshots they see on TV.
Yeah, and also to be having like a lot of complicated thoughts about the border. I mean, this is a complicated issue, and I think people need to be comfortable with thinking about this as a complex, nuanced issue, because most of what we're being fed is black and white answers. And so I think that is important. And so if we have people that decide at this young age to start paying attention to what's happening on the border, to go to the border, during the summer, get involved with one of these advocacy groups, see for themselves what's happening there, or also just to like invest in the way that these issues are playing out in the local community, because there are people living with the fear of deportation right here, like on this campus. And so I think, there's also all sorts of ways to engage with that community and to, be close to the issue that way.
And that's really one of the reasons why we wanted to bring you to campus, but why we chose your book. So it was suggested to me, and you read it to me through the audiobook, so thank you for that.
Sure.
It was great. And so listening to it, I kept thinking of all of the conversations that we could have. Where could students see themselves in their story? Even a student who grew up here in Rochester without that, where could they see themselves in the story? And I think that's where we've really done the push on campus to, hey, choosing your life, figuring out those hard questions for yourself, making these big decisions to challenge yourself and the world that you're in. Where do you see that? Has that been the reaction of a lot of students that you've talked to, or has it been strictly border policy or your experience? Because we're hoping that it's beyond that. You grew up through this experience,
I mean, I think it's, immigration issues intersect with people's lives in very, distinct ways, sometimes in profoundly immediate ways, and sometimes it seems like it has nothing to do with you. And so, I'll sometimes interact with a student who's like, well, my parents are undocumented, or, like I crossed the border when I was a kid. And then other students who are like, wow, I've never really thought of this issue. I've never really, and, I'm just starting to realize like, oh my God, there's a privately run detention center, like 20 miles from campus. Wow, I really want to find out what's happening there. And so I think we are especially living at a time where it's so easy to be bombarded by stories. And I think that it's easy to tune out. It's easy to tune all of that out and to feel like it's not happening to us. But, I think that this is an issue that is happening all around us. And if we do take the time to engage even with one person's story, I think it can make all the difference.
That's awesome. All right. We're so excited. Thank you for sharing this right now. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time. And you will be in a panel right now. And then after the panel, we will get ready for tonight's keynote in the Cirque at 7 o'clock. And all are invited, including the community. So please come out and welcome and meet Francisco Cantu.